Edwina, Kemi Badenoch, is she the new Mrs T?
Up to a point, I think she is, and it's really quite exciting. I mean, the comparisons are almost uncanny. You've got both women were in their 40s. Right. Margaret was a scientist, which was in itself very unusual in Parliament at the time. Yes. Kemi is a computer engineer. My goodness, she could probably take the whole of this place apart and put it back together again. That in itself is really unusual in Parliament because mostly they are PPE graduates or something like that. And Kemi has a crisp, thoughtful, intelligent way of speaking. She's really been thinking about ideas and philosophy. I've been to the hustings. I listened very hard. I was, finding it quite hard at one stage to choose. And then I thought, no, I think Kemi's really got it. I think she's quite inspiring. That in itself is wonderful. Oh,
Lord Ed Vaizey, are you inspired?
Well, I've known Kemi Badenoch a long time. She was my intern. I'm now old enough to have leaders of Conservative parties who were my interns. Intern's a strong word. She spent a week with me when I was an MP, when she was looking at becoming an MP herself. I spoke for her when she took on the unwinnable seat of Dulwich with the great Tessa Jowell, was then the MP. And I like her very much, but I don't like these comparisons with Margaret Thatcher because I think they're unhelpful to her. They're unhelpful to the Conservative Party. Liz Truss was compared to Margaret Thatcher. It didn't do her much good. You remember she famously, I think, sat in a tank mimicking the famous Margaret Thatcher tank
Liz Truss
photo.
compared herself to Margaret Thatcher.
Exactly. So, and it was 34 years ago. I think actually this month, 34 years ago, that Margaret Thatcher was stopped being Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. So I think the Conservative Party has to move on and be a party of the 21st century, a party of technology. As Edwina says, Kemi has a technology background. So I think Kemi is the new Kemi.
Edwina was won over during the campaign.
Yes.
She said she started kind of unsure and ended up backing Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah.
Were you won over during the campaign?
I decided not to vote in this election. I do now somewhat regret it, and I think if I had voted, I probably would have ended up backing Kemi Badenoch. I wanted...
Although that's kind of the safe thing to say
Yeah,
today.
it is safe.
Yeah.
Last Friday, that would have been a bit more...
That is a very good point. That's a terrible thing of me to say. How pathetic.
I would have voted for the winner.
I wanted James Cleverly to win. I think James Cleverly is a good guy and the kind of sort of straight down the middle kind of leader I think the Conservative Party needs, because I think the Conservative Party has a great opportunity. I think that I worry the biggest thing, I think, the challenge for the Conservative Party is not necessarily what Kemi does, it's what the Tory party does. It has to be united.
You didn't vote. Shame on you.
I know.
Shame
well said, Edwina. Well
My Lord,
said.
goodness. Now,
I've come on here to be punished.
Let's just take this opportunity to remind everybody, Ed here knows more about standing in leadership contests than either of us, and the Labour Party hasn't managed to have even one woman yet, let alone a woman of colour or somebody as
There was a woman candidate when I stood in 2010.
You beat her.
Diane Abbott.
You beat her.
Well, she came
and
last.
you still didn't get elected. So, I mean, talk about this century.
Thanks, Edwina, for reminding me.
Yeah.
The only one
Sounds
who
like
has
Ed's getting punished.
The only one who has escaped Edwina's wrath, Susanna, is you.
Yeah, but it's only a matter of time.
We've both been put in our place.
You didn't vote, you didn't stand.
No, I didn't. I haven't stood for leadership of anything. Edwina, you knew, of course, Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, yes. You were quite right. I served under her. Everybody served under Margaret Thatcher.
Under her thumb.
But she was a real radical, and she was great at taking rapid decisions, and I think Kemi is going to be similar in due course. If you came to her with a good proposition, like we did on breast cancer screening, for example, it's that long ago, and you had the figures, and you got the numbers, and you knew what you were trying to do and what the benefit was going to be, you presented it to her, you had half an hour of her time. You came out absolutely exhausted, but you had yes from her. Right. That's leadership, and that, I think, is what we really need in this country now.
It's interesting, some of the criticism of Kemi Badenoch is that she's, is she a bit confrontational? Does she make enemies? Is she a bit shrill? Many of the same things were said of Margaret Thatcher when she first became the Conservative leader in the mid-'70s. There was quite a lot of kind of idea that she wasn't the right person. She proved them all wrong. Is that just like a natural sexism?
There's a kind of sexism about it, which we look at You're nodding, which is, you know, we women should be nice and kind and behave ourselves and make the tea and look up to all you men. Ain't going to happen. You said that I was a little confrontational at times,
well, I hope
a little
so.
difficult. I
that
would
was why you're a
regard
good minister.
As a compliment.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
It's interesting. In her early days, Margaret Thatcher was described as having a shrill and patronising voice. Television critic Clive James compared it to a cat sliding down a blackboard. And she, as a result, I mean, she was told her tone was tense and harsh, not deemed to be a natural communicator. She took elocution lessons, of course, famously, and appeared to have a lack of warmth. I mean, nothing has changed, has it, in the treatment of...
By the way, that was the point I was making. I wasn't endorsing these remarks about Kemi. I was just saying that is what her critics say.
Well, that's because she had a high voice. She was a woman, right? So, you know, deal with it, live with it.
She lowered her tone, didn't she?
I love Kemi Badenoch's voice. I think that she has a really clipped, kind of almost scientific way of speaking. You have to listen quite carefully, and I think one of the things she's going to have to do, and like Margaret, she'll probably have 4 years in opposition to learn how to do it. One of the things she's going to have to do is take complex ideas and boil them down to simple language that appeals to everybody. So
Margaret Thatcher also spent a lot of time strongly distancing herself from the past, and in particular Ted Heath, who had been the Prime Minister. They lost the election in 1974. She did not stand for any return to Ted Heath's style of politics as well as his policies. Do you think Kemi Badenoch needs to do the same thing? Does she need to distance herself from Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson? Now she's won. Is that the right strategy?
I would say not so much from Rishi, who I think time will show, and I'm sure Ed would agree, that he did his very best in extremely difficult circumstances. But yes, we have a lot of past, the Tories, to distance ourselves from, some of which we would much rather have not happen. Like...
So saying Partygate was overblown at the weekend was probably...
Yeah, well, but it's done... I mean, one of the things why I don't quite agree with Ed is what's done and dusted you put behind you.
Exactly.
The key thing now is to look to the future. We have a government which in a matter of weeks has trashed the economy and is actually behind in the polls. How did that happen? It probably wouldn't have happened if you'd been Chancellor, Ed.
You were agreeing with me, Edwina, because I did say we need to look to the future, and every new leader faces the problem of what they do with their predecessor, and every Labour leader has faced the problem of what to do with Tony Blair, who was the most successful Labour Prime Minister in history, but kind of left under a shadow because of the Iraq War. And again, I do think this kind of obsession with looking backwards is very unhelpful. Kemi will be... It's interesting, I agree with...
Keir Starmer spent his whole time dissing Jeremy Corbyn. Tony Blair spent his whole time dissing old Labour.
Yes.
David Cameron spent his whole time saying, I'm changing from the old Conservatives of the past.
Well, I think that's a very...
leaders
I think that's a very
define
important point.
themselves against their past.
I don't think Rishi Sunak deserves opprobrium. He came in a very difficult circumstances. He may not have been as great a Prime Minister as I expected him to be.
Can Kemi Badenoch win the next general election for the Conservatives?
Yes, she can.
Do you believe that?
Yes, I do.
Vaizey?
I do think, there is that old adage, governments lose elections, oppositions don't win them. But I do think that the new Labour government has presented a very easy target or a very clear target. The battle lines are drawn. You know, whatever you think of Rachel Reid's budget,
tax.
you know where she stands on tax and spend, and that is very different from what a Tory
and
budget...
old people.
Very different from what a Tory budget would have been. But the key is oppositions may not win elections, but divided oppositions certainly don't win elections. And the key is for the Tory party to unite behind the leader.
Let's leave on that message of unity then. Thank you very much indeed, Edwina Currie and Lord Ed Vaizey.